Smells Like a Mushroom is an indie game developed by Red Limb Studio, where players navigate a strange whimsical universe where vegetables take on sentient mushrooms in a battle for the galaxy. At first glance, the game seems to promise a quirky, action-packed experience, but does it deliver on all fronts? Let's dive deeper into the story, gameplay, and overall execution and see how well it comes together. The narrative of Smells Like a Mushroom is an odd and intriguing one. You play as Caratado, who alongside his vegetable comrades takes on the mushroom invasion across your solar system. The writing is intentionally goofy, filled with puns and over-the-top dialogue that some players will enjoy, while others might find it grating.
Your anus is a gas monster. This planet's as big as Elstein's level of stupidity and as cold as our captain's heart. We send you to the area we call Igloo. Apparently we're looking for the egg of eternal cold there, which will power the cooling system of your sun armor. Captain?
Expect the unexpected. Uranus is well guarded. Unfortunately, our info is as pathetically poor as Siesta's jokes.
The game's tone is clearly not meant to be taken seriously, and whether or not this humor lands will heavily depend on your taste for the style of storytelling. One of the more impressive aspects of the game is that it's fully voice acted, a significant feature for an indie title of this nature. Having the character's voice adds personality to the otherwise cartoonish narrative, and it elevates the experience beyond text-based interactions. It's a relief to see for me, especially given the style of writing that relies so heavily on its comedic timing and character quirks. However, the story takes time to hit its stride. The introductory segments, including all the rail shooter section and that first boss fight, doesn't really showcase the game's strength. These initial moments feel shallow in terms of mechanics and do little to draw you into the world. It wasn't until reaching the first major planet, Mars, that the gameplay became more engaging and improved with enemy variety, interesting platforming sections, and a boss fight that caught my attention.
Yes, this must be what we came here for. To arms, soldier.
From this point, I became more curious about what may lay ahead. At its core, Smells Like a Mushroom blends third-person shooting and platforming mechanics. Movement is responsive, and the addition to double jumps and dashing adds fluidity to the traversal. The dash in particular can be used indefinitely while on the ground, while only one time when in the air. The controls themselves are smooth, but the stiff character animations undermine the overall experience. Movements lack the fluidity that could make action more satisfying. In games like A Hat in Time, for example, where every jump and dash feels rewarding due to the polished animation, Smells Like a Mushroom fails to capture the same level of enjoyment. The animations feel rigid, and this lack of visual feedback makes the controls feel a bit less responsive than they actually are. Adding to this is the camera, which remains fixed and somewhat distant from the character. This reinforces the feeling of detachment during the gameplay, pulling the player away from the action rather than immersing them in it. The camera's lack of fluidity and its rigid placement prevents it from adapting to the environment, which could have made the chaotic battles feel more intense. There's also many times where the camera just goes into the wall and you can't really see anything. Again, it's very rigid, very stiff, which also makes the combat a little weird. But speaking of the combat, this is where the game feels a little bit inconsistent. On the one hand, the variety of weapons at your disposal, ranging from standard guns to more exotic choices, provides options to different playstyles. However, I have to find myself relying on the same 3 guns for greater range, as many other weapons felt underutilized due to the need to engage enemies from a distance. The weapon variety is there, but the design doesn't always encourage using the full arsenal that you have. The enemy AI is fairly basic as well, with most of the enemies simply standing in place and firing, offering a little challenge, or they're just rushing at you straight forward. There's nothing really in between. The simplicity leads to combat feeling a little bit repetitive over time. However, the boss fights offer a more rewarding experience. The game shines during these multi-phase encounters where bosses escalate their attack patterns, creating a bullet hell-like scenario that requires quick reflexes and focus. These fights introduce the kind of chaos that the game's regular encounters lack, making them really stand out as a highlight. That said, the combat could benefit from more dynamic problem solving. In one boss fight in an icy planet, I was stuck because of some ice shards, and I couldn't use my flamethrower that I had. That's a missed opportunity to make the environmental elements a part of the combat strategy, yet I understand how that can be out of scope for the game. This game uses a cel-shaded art style. While initially appealing, it begins to feel somewhat bland sometimes as you progress. They like a little bit of detail, or maybe not even detail, but just more things around. The environments rely heavily on glow effects, which feel like a shortcut to add visual interest rather than an intentional design choice. This over-reliance on glowing elements creates this artificial sense of depth, but it doesn't mask the fact that the maps are otherwise unremarkable. The level design itself is fun at times, with various planets offering different themes and plenty of platforming challenges to keep things interesting. However, the constant use of green arrows to direct players through the levels really distracts from the experience. It feels like a solution to a larger problem, rather than designing the levels that naturally guide players through their layout. The developers seem to have added these markers to prevent frustration. This choice might have been driven by playtesting feedback, but it leaves the impression of a missed opportunity to refine the map design, or maybe there was just not enough time to do it. I gotta say though, the soundtrack is one of the most enjoyable elements of Smells Like a Mushroom, featuring a mix of sci-fi, synths, drum and bass, and even some dubstep here and there. The music fits the alien-themed combat and platforming well. It adds energy and atmosphere to the game, particularly in the more intense sequences. However, there are noticeable issues with the sound design. For one, the music doesn't always loop correctly, leading to awkward silences that break the immersion. Moreover, the transitions between level music and combat music are often jarring. For example, in one level, the music would shift from an impressive drum and bass track to an alien combat music whether an enemy appeared, constantly cutting the atmosphere in half.
It's my lucky day.
This inconsistency in the audio transitions really disrupted my flow, to be honest, which is unfortunate given the high quality of the soundtrack itself. I would have removed that whole shift in the first place, or just make it happen less often. One of the most pleasant surprises of this game is the inclusion of split-screen co-op mode. This allows players to team up locally and tackle the game together, adding an extra layer of enjoyment for the game. Although it does lack online co-op, since the game is on Steam, you can also use Steam Remote Play as an easy workaround. That way you can play with a friend online. In terms of difficulty, this game is generally on the easier side, particularly for seasoned platformers. While the boss fights introduce a level of chaos and challenge that keep things interesting, the regular combat encounters and platforming sections don't push back too much, making the game accessible but potentially underwhelming for players seeking a more demanding experience. Although again, the boss fights actually do get a little chaotic, not gonna lie. This is an ambitious indie game with a lot of potential, I have to say. The combination of quirky writing, impressive boss fights, and a strong soundtrack create moments of a lot of enjoyment, but the game feels like it's held back by a lack of polish in key areas. The stiff animations, the fairly basic AI, and the over-reliance on visual effects instead of detailed environments detract what could be a more immersive and engaging experience. It feels like the game needs about 10% more polish to truly shine, but as we know, this can be a difficult task, even for larger studios. With some adjustments, especially to the camera and animation and level design, Smells Like a Mushroom could elevate itself from a quirky indie to something more memorable. As it stands, it's a fun, if flawed experience that will appeal for those who appreciate its offbeat charm. This is a much higher quality game than a lot of indies that come out on Steam or any other platform, so it's actually worth to take a look. And for the price that they're asking, it's actually a pretty good deal, especially if you have a friend to play co-op with.